The first rule of survival in my world is simple: never let them see you bleed. I learned that lesson at 12 years old, watching my mother press concealer over her bruises before my father's business dinners. Now, 19 years later, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Conrad Hotel. The pale lavender silk of my dress whispered against my thighs, my spine straight like the stem of the champagne flute in my hand. Around me, the elites of New York society laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Their diamonds caught the light like shards of ice. Kevin's hands settled on the small of my back, fingers pressing hard enough to leave marks. I knew it would bloom purple by morning. "Smile, darling," he murmured against my ear. His breath was hot with aged bourbon. "The Carlyles are watching." I curved my lips obediently, tilting my head to expose the column of my throat the way he liked. From across the room, Karen Carlyle lifted her champagne glass in a mocking toast. Her eyes were staring at me like I was part of the decor. They all saw it, of course, the way Kevin's grip tightened when I spoke to another man, the way my laughter always came a bit too late, the careful distance everyone kept as if his temper was contagious. "Your speech was brilliant," I lied, turning to face him. The lie came easily after 5 years of marriage, too easily. Kevin's thumb traced the ridge of my cheekbone, a gesture that looked tender to anyone watching. His nails bit into my skin. "You weren't listening." I heard every word. "Then why were you talking to Benson during it?" His voice stayed low and pleasant even as his fingers slid down to clamp around my wrist. I didn't flinch. He asked about the charity gala. Kevin put on a fake smile. "You think I'm stupid?" He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "I saw the way he looked at you." The music swelled around us, a string quartet sawing through some forgettable classical piece. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes, the hungry anticipation of a crowd scenting blood in the water. The Jamesons were the closest thing New York high society had to royalty, and our fights were their favorite spectator sport. I should have stayed quiet. I knew better, but the champagne burned in my veins and ignited the ghost of the girl I'd been before Kevin. The one who'd graduated top of her class at Wharton School of Business. The one who turned down a full scholarship to marry him. "Maybe if you spent less time imagining things," I said softly, "you'd notice the real threats to your company." The room went still. Kevin's hand moved so fast I didn't have time to react. His fingers tangled in my perfectly styled hair, which my stylist had spent an hour perfecting, yanking my head back until tears sprang to my eyes. The pain was radiating down my neck. "Know your place," he hissed. For one endless moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat and the sickening awareness of everyone's gaze locked on us. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, my hair came free of its pins, tumbling down my back in a wave of humiliation. I didn't make a sound. Kevin released me with a shove. His lips curled as I caught myself against the edge of a table. Around us, conversations resumed with forced cheer. The socialites retreated behind their flutes of Dom Perignon, like witnesses denying they'd seen a crime. Later in the town car ride home, Kevin pressed an ice pack to my scalp and murmured insincere apologies. He'd promised it would never happen again. He caressed me with the same hands that had hurt me, whispering about how beautiful I was. But in that moment, standing in the ruins of my dignity with my hair spilling around my shoulders, I made a decision. I would ruin him. Not with screaming matches or messy divorces, not with restraining orders or tearful interviews. No. I would dismantle his life brick by gilded brick until the only thing left of Kevin was the memory of his arrogance. By the time the car pulled up to our penthouse, I'd already begun planning. My reflection in the elevator caught me by surprise. Lipstick smeared, the left strap of my pale lavender gown torn where he'd grabbed me. Sitting at the vanity in our master bedroom, I reached for the jade hairbrush he brought back from Hong Kong. In the mirror, our eyes locked. His eyes bloodshot from bourbon, mine perfectly clear. I slowly dragged the brush through my tangled hair, wincing when it caught on the tender spot. I held up a cluster of hair caught in the bristles. "You prefer me quiet?" "Broken." Kevin laughed. "You're being dramatic." He plucked the brush from my hand. "You know I love you." The lie tasted like old pennies in my mouth. When he kissed me, I let him. When his hands found the zipper of my dress, I didn't stop him. I didn't turn from the mirror, just started removing my makeup. His reflection moved closer, hands settling on my bare shoulders. I watched his thumbs stroke the bruises he'd left earlier, the way a painter might admire his work. "You made me look bad tonight." I didn't respond. While Kevin showered, I accessed his private server using the password he'd carelessly left written on his desk calendar. 20 minutes later, the bathroom door opened. "You're still up?" Kevin stood framed in the doorway, a towel slung low on his hips, water beading on the tattoo over his heart, the Clark Industries logo, inked after his first million. The steam curled around him like a halo. I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I nodded, then headed to the bathroom to wash his stench off my skin. When he fell asleep an hour later, arm thrown possessively across my waist, I waited exactly 30 minutes before sliding out of the bed. The home office smelled of Cuban cigars and ambition. Kevin's laptop glowed in the darkness. Still logged in on because the great Kevin Clark never imagined someone might dare breach his inner sanctum, least of all his wife. While he snored, I spent hours copying files. The shell company files were exactly where I'd found them 6 months ago during my late-night reconnaissance missions, buried beneath layers of dummy corporations with names like Bridgestone Holdings, Project Eastview, and Marlowe Investments. Transfer records blinked across the screen, each one a thread in the web. I was weaving $4.7 million to an account in Zurich, $2.3 million to the Caymans, $1.8 million to a numbered company in Singapore. My fingers flew across the keyboard, copying files, tracing money trails. The external drive in my robe's pocket seemed to glow with stolen secrets. I had opened an offshore account under a name no one would ever trace to me. The first transfer was a modest $2,500 from one of Kevin's shell companies he thought no one knew about, as a test run, proof of concept. As dawn painted the skyline pink, I closed the laptop and watched the sunrise glint off the Clark Industries tower across the park. Somewhere in that building, my husband's empire was waking up, blissfully unaware that its destruction had already begun. I smiled, running my fingers through my still tender scalp. The penthouse was silent except for the humming of the automatic Keurig coffee machine in the kitchen. The one Kevin had bought because he said my coffee tasted like sewer water. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting silver stripes across the Italian marble where I stood barefoot in the bathroom. In the master bathroom, the shower ran hot, my skin burned under the hot water. I couldn't wash off the sensation his hands left on my skin. Steam curled under the door frame like grasping fingers. I counted the seconds between each drop of water hitting tile, timing them against the throbbing in my scalp where Kevin's fingers had been buried the night before. The digital clock on the nightstand read 6:17 a.m. After Kevin left for work, I moved with precision. The safe was behind a Van Gogh reproduction. I entered the code, our wedding date, because Kevin was nothing, if not predictable. I removed the black leather ledger. The pages whispered as they turned, each entry written in his precise handwriting. Detailed notes. March 14th, transfer of $750,000 to Cayman Holdings, Phase 2 permits. April 2nd, $1.2 million dock workers union silence fee. May 18th, $500,000 Judge Vance's retirement fund. My phone vibrated against the dresser, a single notification. Files downloaded, 91% complete. Suddenly, the alarm beeped, indicating the front door had been opened. I abruptly slipped the ledger into the hidden compartment of my Birkin, the one Kevin's mistress had picked out last Christmas. The file transfer notification vibrated again. Download complete. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. The home office door swung open. Kevin stood silhouetted in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You're home early," I said, steadying my breath. "What are you doing?" he asked, ignoring my comment. I gestured to the screen where a fake email draft sat open, writing Lillian about the Met Gala seating chart. He moved closer, eyes narrowing at the screen. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought he'd see through the ruse. Then his hand settled on the back of my neck. "The 11:15 a.m. call with Tokyo was canceled, so I decided to come home to see if you wanted to have lunch at the French bistro you like so much." I never liked that restaurant. That was Kevin's favorite place. I nodded. "I'd love that. Let me grab my shoes." I closed the laptop and let him lead me away, the weight of the ledger burning a hole in my Birkin. Days later, I booked a private meeting room at the Marquis Hotel under the name Whitney Peters, the alias I'd been cultivating for 18 months through a network of shell companies and untraceable prepaid phones. By noon, I was sipping hibiscus tea across from Hui Yang, Kevin's former business partner, watching his face as he scanned the documents I pulled up on my tablet. "You understand what I'm showing you, right?" I asked, stirring sugar into my tea. Hui Yang's knuckles whitened around the tablet. "These are the same records I was fired for, because I asked about them." I smiled. Then I suppose you'll want to help me destroy him? Outside, a spring rain began to fall, washing the streets of Manhattan clean. Somewhere across town, Kevin was closing a $200 million deal, utterly unaware that his wife had just declared war. The first move had been made. The game had begun. Rain lashed against the windows of the Marquis Hotel's private meeting room, turning Park Avenue into a shimmering blur of taillights and umbrellas. The storm had rolled in just as Hui Yang's hands began shaking while reading the documents. I watched the water streak down the glass like tears counting the seconds between lightning flashes. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Then the thunder rattled the crystal tea service between us. Hui Yang finally looked up, his once boyish face now gaunt from 2 years of unemployment and a tarnished reputation. This is more than embezzlement. His finger trembled over the wire transfer records. These are payments to city officials, the union payoffs, the Eastview project. I poured more tea into his half-consumed cup, the hibiscus scent mixed with faint vanilla fragrance freshener in the meeting room. 23 counts of bribery, I said calmly, 17 counts of wire fraud, and that's just what I found so far. The leather chair creaked as Hui Yang leaned back. Why show me this? His eyes darted to my left wrist where the diamond tennis bracelet couldn't quite cover the fingerprint bruises. You're his wife. Lightning flashed again. I set down the teapot with deliberate care. Do you know why Kevin really fired you? Hui Yang's jaw clenched. Because of the offshore accounts. I asked too many questions. No. I scrolled through my tablet and pushed it across the table back to him. A security feed from Kevin's office played. The video of Hui Yang leaning over Kevin's desk after hours, his hand brushing the framed photo of me from our wedding day. There was a longing in his expression. Hui Yang turned deathly pale. Kevin didn't fire you for finding his crimes. I said softly. He fired you for wanting what was his. The thunder came louder this time, vibrating the silverware. When Hui Yang spoke again, his voice changed, lower and rougher with an edge I recognized from boardroom coups. What exactly do you want from me? I reached into my Birkin and slid an encrypted burner phone across the table. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m., a reporter from the Wall Street Journal will call this number. You'll tell her everything, but only about the financial crimes. My fingernail tapped the frozen image on the tablet. This stays between us. Hui Yang pocketed the phone. With a humorless smile, I said, You'll receive 2 million in untraceable bitcoins and the satisfaction of watching Kevin get in return what he did to you. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Hui Yang stood abruptly, his shadow stretching long across the wall. He'll know it was you. I smiled and sipped my tea. Let him try to prove it. As the door clicked shut behind him, I opened my real phone to the encrypted messaging app. A new notification blinked. Robin Henderson has accepted your meeting request. Outside, the storm raged on. Somewhere in Midtown, Kevin was probably yelling at some junior executive, completely unaware that the noose was tightening. I signaled the waiter for more hot water, humming along with the piano music drifting from the hotel bar. The pieces were moving exactly as planned. By the time I finished my second cup, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the puddles like scattered coins. I left a $100 bill under the teapot, enough to cover the service, but not enough to be memorable, and walked out into the newly washed world. My driver held open the door of the unmarked town car. Where to, ma'am? I checked my watch, just enough time to change before meeting Robin. The usual place, James, and step on it. As we pulled away from the curb, my fingers traced the outline of the USB drive in my pocket, the one containing Kevin's little black book of bribes. The weight of it felt like freedom. The whistleblower had been activated. Phase 2 will now begin. The scent of chlorine hung heavy in the air of the Four Seasons pool deck. I adjusted my sunglasses, watching Robin Henderson approach like a nervous sparrow. She'd chosen the location. Public enough to feel safe, private enough for secrets. Smart girl. The midday sun glinted off the water, casting dancing reflections across her anxious face as she hovered by my lounge chair. Jade, her voice barely carried over the splash of swimmers. I gestured to the empty chair beside me. Its white cushions are crisp and untouched. Sit, Robin. You're safe here. She perched on the edge, fingers worrying the strap of her tote bag. Up close, I could see the toll the last 3 years had taken. The thinning of her dark hair, The permanent crease between her brows that no amount of Botox could erase, the same crease I'd seen in the deposition photos after Kevin destroyed her career. The waiter appeared with our drinks, sparkling water with lime for her, vodka martini for me. I waited until he'd retreated before speaking. "You brought what I asked for?" Robin's knuckles whitened around her glass. "Before I show you, I need to know why you're doing this?" A child shrieked with laughter in the pool. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the ice clink against the glass. "Because Kevin needs to learn what happens when you break things that don't belong to you." Her breath hitched. Reaching into her bag, she produced a manila envelope, slightly warped at the edges as if it was handled often. "Everything's there. The original designs, the emails, the NDA they forced me to sign." I slid the envelope into my beach bag without looking. "Tell me about the night it happened." Robin's gaze fixed on the horizon. "It was just before the Shanghai launch. I stayed late to finish the prototype. Kevin came in drunk, smelling like perfume that wasn't yours." She swallowed hard. "He said if I didn't let him?" The ice in my drink cracked softly. "You refused." "I need him in the groin." A ghost of her old fire flickered in her eyes. The next morning, security escorted me out. By noon, every tech blog was running stories about how I'd stolen designs from the company's server. I removed a black Amex card from my wallet and placed it between us. "There's $375,000 on this. Another million when you testify." Robin stared at the card like it might bite her. "He'll destroy me again." "No." I leaned closer, letting my sunglasses slip down just enough for her to see my eyes. "This time we'll destroy him." Across the pool, a familiar figure entered the deck. Kevin's personal assistant, Vivian, scanning the crowd. I pressed the card into Robin's hand. "The journalist from Forbes will call you tomorrow. Tell her everything. The assault, the stolen designs, the cover-up, everything." Standing, I adjusted my wide-brimmed hat. "And Robin, wear the blue dress for the interview. It brings out your eyes." Her shocked expression followed me as I walked toward the exit where the assistant was now frantically texting. I paused just long enough to drop my voice. "Looking for someone, Vivian?" Her head snapped up. "Tell Kevin I'm getting a massage." I slid past her, leaving Robin. "And Vivian, the next time you report my movements to my husband, you'll be out on the street with the rest of his discarded toys." The elevator doors closed on her stunned face. As it descended, my phone buzzed with Hui Yong's burner number. The message contained just 2 words, and it's live. I opened the Wall Street Journal app. The headline blazed across the screen. "Kark Industries' former COO alleges systemic financial fraud in explosive interview." The first domino had fallen. By the time I reached the spa, my phone was exploding with notifications. Kevin's name flashed again and again. Each missed call more frantic than the last. I silenced it, sinking onto the plush massage table as warm hands began working the tension from my shoulders. Somewhere in the city, Robin would be rereading her testimony. Hui Yang would be fielding calls from reporters, and Kevin would be realizing for the first time in his life that he wasn't untouchable. The masseuse's fingers found the knot at the base of my skull, the one that had been there since the gala. As it finally began to loosen, I smiled. The hunt had begun, and the lioness ate first. The scent of burning sage couldn't mask the stale cigarette smoke clinging to the private investigator's cramped Chinatown office. I crossed my legs, watching dust mites dance in the slanted afternoon light as Paul tapped his yellowed fingernail against the grainy surveillance photo. "Your husband's got expensive tastes in mistresses," he rasped, sliding another picture across the desk. "This one's a junior curator at MoMA. Cost him a mulberry Bayswater for her last birthday." I examined the image of the willowy brunette pressed against Kevin in a dimly lit elevator, with her hand disappearing beneath his suit jacket. The timestamp showed our anniversary dinner. He ran 45 minutes late because he was stuck at the office. How poetic. I dropped the photo onto the growing pile. "And the others?" Paul's wheezing laugh turned into a cough. "Christ, lady, most wives want 1 or 2 names. You're collecting them like baseball cards." The desk lamp flickered as I opened my checkbook. "Let's call it a comprehensive audit of my marriage." He lit another cigarette with shaking hands. "There's the yoga instructor, that's the penthouse on 57th Street, the hedge fund analyst, he flew to Monaco, and this one." He produced an image of a fresh-faced intern barely out of college. "She's pregnant." The pen froze in my hand. Paul exhaled a smoke ring. 8 weeks. Your husband's already set up a trust fund." I finished writing the check with deliberate strokes. The numbers were significantly higher than we'd agreed. I'll need copies of all the trust documents and the results of the paternity test. As I stood to leave, Paul cleared his throat. You should know your husband hired someone to follow you last week. The door handle felt suddenly cold under my palm. Some ex-security tough guy named Christoph. Paul stubbed out his cigarette. I'd watch my back if I were you. The August heat hit me like a wall when I stepped outside. My driver materialized at the curb, but I waved him off. I needed to walk, needed to think. Halfway down M Street, I spotted him. A hulking shadow in a wrinkled, oversized suit. His reflection glided between shop windows like a shark beneath the surface. I ducked into a cramped herbalist shop, the air thick with the scent of ginseng and star anise. The elderly shopkeeper looked up as I grabbed the first thing my hand touched, a small velvet pouch for unwanted attention. The old woman said in heavily accented English, "Bad man following pretty lady?" I paid in cash. Outside, Christoph leaned against a parking meter, pretending to check his phone. Turning down a narrow alley, I quickened my pace. The footsteps behind me matched my rhythm. Exactly at the dead end, I whirled around to face him. Christoph dropped from the fire escape with cat-like grace, blocking my exit. His smile revealed a gold cap tooth. "Mrs. Stevens, your husband is very worried about you." I loosened the velvet pouch's drawstring. When he reached for me, I flung the powder directly into his face. He staggered back, swearing in Russian. The herbal mixture burned his eyes. By the time he'd blinked away the tears, I was already slipping through a hidden doorway the shopkeeper had pointed out, one that led straight to the bustling kitchen of a busy dumpling house. Back at the penthouse, I found Kevin pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. His phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what it costs. Find her." He turned and saw me standing there, my heels still damp from the alley. "Looking for someone, darling?" I asked sweetly. The phone slipped from his fingers. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other. Predator recognizing predator. Then his mask snapped back into place. "Where the hell have you been?" He grabbed my arm, his breath reeking of bourbon. "Do you have any idea what's happening? The stock price is tanking. The board is calling for an emergency meeting." I let my eyes go wide and innocent. "That's terrible. Maybe you should—" I picked up his phone from the couch and handed it to him. "Call your lawyer." His grip tightened. "This isn't funny, Jade. Someone is leaking classified company information." His thumb brushed the fresh bruise forming on my wrist. "If I find out you're involved." I kissed him hard, enough to taste blood. When I pulled away, his pupils were dilated with equal parts lust and fury. "Better hurry," I whispered against his lips. "The Wall Street Journal's next edition goes to print in—" I glanced at my diamond-encrusted watch. 3 hours. As I walked toward our bedroom, his phone rang again. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. The pregnant intern had just gone public. The sharks were circling, and the water was about to turn red. The morning air smelled of burning leaves and impending rain as my town car pulled up to the Clark Industries Tower. Through the tinted windows, I watched reporters swarm the entrance like hungry jackals. Their cameras trained on the arriving board members. My fingers tightened around the manila folder in my lap, the one containing signed affidavits from 3 former executives, all detailing Kevin's financial indiscretions in excruciating detail. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Security override complete. You'll have 27 minutes." The car door opened, and suddenly I was blinking against a barrage of camera flashes. "Mrs. Clark, any comment on your husband's alleged affairs? Are you aware of the SEC investigation?" I kept my head high, my Gucci trench coat flaring behind me as I swept through the gauntlet. The lobby's marble floors echoed with the sharp sound of my Christian Louboutin, a sound that had always made junior associates scatter like frightened rabbits. Today, even the senior partners avoided my gaze. In the private elevator that required Kevin's biometric scan to access the executive floors, I pressed my thumb to the reader, smiling when it turned green, courtesy of the latex fingerprint mold lifted from his whiskey glass last night. As the elevator ascended, I checked my reflection in the brass paneling. The subtle smoky eye makeup, the blood-red lipstick, the single strand of pearls from my mother. The doors opened directly into chaos. Kevin's assistant, Vivian, stood frozen outside the boardroom, her face ashen through the glass walls. I could see him screaming at the CFO, spittle flying as he slammed his fist onto the conference table, hard enough to rattle the water glasses. The other board members sat in stunned silence, all except for Charles Langford. The general counsel met my gaze through the glass with a nearly imperceptible nod. Right on schedule, Vivian rushed toward me. "Mrs. Clark, you can't—" I brushed past her and pushed open the boardroom doors. Every head swiveled toward me. Kevin's rage contorted into something far more dangerous when he saw what I carried. "This is a private meeting." "So private you forgot to file the proper disclosures?" I dropped the folder onto the table with a satisfying thud. "Gentlemen, I believe you'll find pages 14 to 27 particularly illuminating. Offshore accounts, bribes to city officials, misuse of company funds, and so much more." I let my gaze flicker to Kevin. "The real numbers behind the Shanghai acquisition." The room erupted. Kevin moved faster than I anticipated. His hand closed around my wrist, hard enough to leave bruises tomorrow. "You conniving bitch!" he hissed low enough that only I could hear. I smiled sweetly. "Language, darling, the children are watching." The entire board was staring at us like we were a car crash in slow motion. Charles Langford cleared his throat. "Kevin, perhaps you should leave." Kevin's voice shook with barely contained violence. "Absolutely not! You think you're clever." He advanced on me, his tie loosened, his pupils expanded widely. "Those documents are worthless without a digital trail." I withdrew a thumb drive from my pocket and dangled it between us. "Funny story. Your IT director has a gambling problem and a very persuasive wife." For the first time in our marriage, I saw genuine fear flicker across Kevin's face. The intercom buzzed, Vivian's voice trembled through the speaker. "SEC agents are in the lobby, and there's a process server with divorce papers." I straightened my cuffs, savoring the moment. "I believe that's my cue." Kevin caught my arm as I turned to leave. "You'll regret this," he breathed. His lips nearly brushed my ear. "I'll take everything, the houses, the art, your precious foundation." I wrenched free and smoothed my blouse, meeting his glare without blinking. "Try me." Outside, the promised rain had begun, washing the streets clean. As I stepped into the waiting town car, my phone buzzed. A notification from the offshore accounts. The final transfers had gone through. Somewhere above me, Kevin was probably smashing his office to pieces. Let him. The real damage was already done. As the car pulled away, I opened my calendar and circled a date 2 weeks from now. The emergency shareholder meeting where Charles Langford would nominate the new interim CEO. My lips curved as I typed the name I'd chosen for my shell corporation, Lotus Holdings. The scent of scorched espresso beans and panic hung thick in the air of the boutique coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. I stirred a couple sugar cubes into my cappuccino, watching the dissolution of Kevin's carefully constructed empire. Across from me, Charles Langford's fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses, the only outward sign that the old shark was nervous. "They've frozen his assets," Charles murmured, glancing at the legal briefs spread between us. The morning sunlight caught the embossed SEC seal on the top document, making it gleam like a warning. "Including your joint accounts." I took a slow sip, letting the bitter warmth spread across my tongue. "How unfortunate." Charles leaned in, his aftershave failing to mask the sweat forming at his temples. "Jade, you need to understand, without access to those funds, your position in the shareholder vote will be just fine." I opened my tote bag and slid a slim folder across the table. "Lotus Holdings now controls 48% of Clark stocks through various investment vehicles, combined with the shares you've quietly acquired." Charles's breath hitched as he scanned the documents. "You've been planning this for years." Outside, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. Kevin erupted from the back seat, his tailored suit rumpled. His usually perfect hair stood like matted tumbleweeds. Through the glass, I could see the veins pulsing at his temple as he scanned the street. I dabbed my lips with a linen napkin. "We should go." The back exit led to a narrow alley smelling of garbage and damp concrete. Charles's driver waited at the far end, engine running. As we hurried toward the car, a familiar voice rang out behind us. "Jade." Kevin stood silhouetted in the alley mouth, his chest heaving. In that moment, he looked almost pathetic, like a wounded animal backed into a corner. Then his gaze dropped to the folder in Charles's hands, and his expression twisted into something feral. "You treacherous bitch." He took a step forward, his Italian loafers crunching on broken glass. "I'll bury you." Charles moved to shield me, but I stepped around him, meeting Kevin's glare without flinching. "Language, darling." I smoothed my skirt. "You're making a scene." His laugh was jagged with hysteria. A scene? You've destroyed my company. Spittle flew from his lips. Was this your plan all along? The morning sun caught the diamond bracelet on my wrist, the one he'd given me after the first time he'd backhanded me. No, Kevin, my plan was to be your wife. I adjusted the strap with deliberate care. You're the one who made me your enemy. A police siren wailed in the distance. Kevin's head snapped toward the sound, his survival instincts finally overriding his rage. He backed away, pointing a shaking finger at me. This isn't over. Oh, but it is. I opened the car door. The shareholder vote is just a formality. At this point, though, I do hope you'll attend. It would be unseemly for the former CEO to miss his own funeral. As the town car pulled away, I watched Kevin shrink in the rearview mirror. A broken king in a ruined kingdom. Charles exhaled sharply beside me. That was dangerous. I powered on my tablet, pulling up the latest stock reports. Clark shares had plummeted another 30 this morning. Not nearly as dangerous as what comes next. The screen flickered to life, displaying a live feed from the lobby of Clark Tower. Reporters swarmed like vultures as SEC agents marched through the sliding doors, boxes of evidence in hand, and there standing proudly beside them was Robin Henderson. Her blue dress perfectly complemented the triumphant gleam in her eyes as she gave her first on-camera interview. Charles whistled low. You orchestrated this entire thing. I closed the tablet with a quiet click. No, Charles. The car turned onto Park Avenue where the Clark Industries logo still blazed arrogantly across the skyline. I'm just the cleanup crew. My phone buzzed with an alert. The final transfer from our Swiss accounts had cleared exactly $387 million, routed through 7 different countries before landing safely in an account bearing only my name. Enough to buy what remained of Kevin's empire at fire sale prices. Enough to ensure he'd never recover. I leaned back against the buttery leather seats, watching the city blur past. I'm certain Kevin was probably somewhere screaming at some poor junior associate demanding answers. The game was already over, and I'd won. The scent of lemon polish and fresh-cut orchids filled the Clark Industries boardroom. As I took my seat at the head of the 20-foot mahogany table, my table now, outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a late autumn storm darkened the Manhattan skyline. The first fat raindrops began to streak the glass like tears. The room fell silent as the double doors swung open. Kevin stood framed in the doorway, his once impeccable suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. His razor-sharp cheekbones are more pronounced after weeks of legal battles and sleepless nights. The golden boy of Wall Street looked diminished. Mrs. Clark has called this meeting to order, Charles announced, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Kevin's knuckles whitened around the doorframe. This is a joke. I uncapped my pen with a deliberate click. Item 1 on the agenda, election of new leadership. I met his glare without blinking. All in favor of my appointment as interim CEO. Hands rose around the table, some eager, some reluctant, all inevitable. Even old man Richards, Kevin's most loyal sycophant, lifted his trembling hand. I arched a brow in his direction. The vote was unanimous. Kevin's broken laugh. You scheming bitch. You planned this from the beginning. I stood, smoothing my custom Carolina Herrera skirt suit. No, Kevin. The beginning was when I was 26 and stupid enough to believe your promises. I stepped around the table, my Louboutin clicking like a countdown. The beginning was when I shelved my MBA to plan your charity galas. Rain lashed against the windows as I stopped just beyond his reach. This, I gestured to the boardroom, to the signed documents, to the future stretching before us. This was just good business. His hand twitched, that familiar tell before he'd grab my wrist or yank my hair, but froze when 2 security guards stepped forward. New hires loyal to me. I leaned in close enough to smell the bourbon on his breath. You should leave now. The press has already gotten wind of your indictment. For one suspended moment, the man I'd married stared at me with something almost like respect. Then his lips curled into a sneer. Enjoy your victory lap, Jade, but remember. His finger jabbed toward my chest. I made you. I caught his wrist midair, my nails piercing into his pulse point. The way he'd once done to me. No, darling. I whispered loud enough for the entire board to hear, I unmade you. The guards escorted him out past the gawking assistants, past the framed Time magazine covers bearing his smirking face, past the empire he'd built, and I'd stolen brick by gilded brick. The elevator doors closed on his furious glare, and just like that, Kevin Clark was erased from his own kingdom. Back in the boardroom, Charles handed me a glass of champagne to new beginnings. I clinked my glass against his, then set it aside untouched. There would be time for celebration later. Now I had work to do. My first act as CEO was to dissolve Kevin's prized offshore accounts and return every embezzled dollar to the company. My second was to promote Robin to head of R&D with a seven-figure salary and full credit for the designs Kevin had stolen. By the time I reached my new office, his former office with his name already scraped from the frosted glass, the storm had broken. Dust sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the city gold. My phone buzzed with a notification. The final divorce papers had been signed. All Kevin had left was 12 years in a federal prison, the clothes on his back, and the Rolex I'd let him keep out of sentimentality. I powered on my computer,
I gestured
the
to the
Clark
boardroom,
Industries
to
logo
the signed
flashing across the
documents,
screen.
to the future stretching before
With a few
us.
keystrokes, I pulled
This
up
was
the
just good
architectural
business.
plans for our
His hand
rebranding.
twitched.
That